Hello, good morning. My name is Rachel from Thoughbox, and today I'm here to talk to you about rubbish. Now, to begin with, we're going to play a little game called the odd one out. I'm going to show you 4 pictures of different piles of rubbish, and I want you to see if you can find which of those pictures is the odd one out. Okay, take a look. Okay, so that might have been quite easy because the odd one out was the picture with the leaves. But why? Why was that the odd one out? I'd like you to take 1 minute and talk to the person next to you about what makes that picture of rubbish different from the other 3 pictures. Okay, have a minute to talk about it. Okay, so you and your partner might have come up with quite a few reasons why that picture was different to the other 3 pictures. But really what we're going to talk about today is what happens to all of that rubbish when we throw it away. So for example, one of those pictures is a woman who's thrown away hundreds of plastic bottles. In another picture, there's somebody surrounded by tin cans and somebody else surrounded by cardboard boxes. And in the last picture, the odd one out, the picture is of the landscape covered in leaves. Now, you might not think of leaves as rubbish, but they are nature's litter. But what happens to nature's rubbish when nature throws it away? Let's take a look.
So every year, trees lose their leaves, flowers drop their petals, birds lose their feathers, snakes shed their skin, and just like humans, all birds and animals out there urinate and defecate, which is to poo and wee. But what happens to all the bits and pieces and the leftovers that the living things around us leave behind? Why isn't our planet covered in piles of rubbish growing higher and higher every day? In nature, when things are no longer needed or no longer alive, they become waste. However, Mother Nature has got her very own waste disposal system, which has been in place for millions and millions of years. And there is a natural cycle, which means that everything that's wasted in nature or that's no longer needed is broken down, is reused, and absolutely nothing is wasted, which means that there is actually no such thing as waste in the natural world, as everything is used for something else in the ecosystem. Let's take a little look and find out a bit more about what that means. Have you ever noticed that something like an apple or rotting fruit just gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it almost seems to disappear? But why does this happen? When an apple starts to rot, all the different parts of that apple disappear back into the ecosystem. So some water vapor from the apple rises up into gas and goes up into the air. Tiny organisms in the ground and in the earth will eat some of the animal matter, so some of the apple matter. The digestive waste from the organisms goes back into the air or to the ground and turns into gas or liquid or solid. And then liquids from that apple will rot and seep into the ground. Now, you might have learned about some of this before, but some of these ideas might be a little bit new. So let's take a little closer look at what this means. In nature, all of the rubbish that is created by the natural systems is known as organic waste. And organic waste basically is anything that comes from plants or animal sources that's thrown away or that's no longer needed. Organic waste is biodegradable. And that means it's very easily broken down by other organisms over time, and it all disappears back into the soil and becomes something new. Lots of the organic rubbish simply decomposes because other living things around it, known as organisms, feed on them because they contain nutrients. Now, nutrients are things like vitamins and minerals, which all living things, including us humans, need to grow and to stay alive. Now let's think for a minute about a tree in your garden or in your street or in your local park. If that tree was to fall down, pretty soon a human would probably come along and chop it up and take it away. But if we just left that tree, what would happen? Take 1 minute and talk to the person next to you about what you think would happen to that tree. So you've probably come up with lots of different ideas about what happens to this tree, and many of you will know if a tree falls down and gets the chance to rot or to decompose in the natural world, it simply becomes food for the soil. Nature's cleanup crew come along and feed on the wood from the dead tree, and they leave all of the extra nutrients from the dead tree in the ground for the soil. And then after the tree is gone, other plants will grow in the same spot. Now, this is how we make compost, and many of you might have learnt about how compost is made before, and you probably know that some of the rubbish that we create, we put into compost bins, and that goes back into the earth to create healthy soils. But who are nature's cleanup crew? Let's have a moment and meet the breakdown team and the scavengers. So I'm going to give you 1 minute in your class to identify as many of these creatures as you can. Okay, off you go. Okay, so some of these will be very familiar to all of you, and some of them might be a little bit more peculiar. We've got the snail, the worm, the beetle, the slug, the millipede, the mushroom, and then the mighty microbes. Now, microbes are tiny, tiny creatures that are almost invisible to the human eye and that live deep within the soil, that also work on helping some of the organic waste in nature to decompose. And all of this team of decomposers, if you like, we can call them the breakdown team, because they take nature's waste and they chew it up and churn it up and remove it from being waste and turn it into something new. It might turn into nutrients to keep them healthy, but it might go back into the soil. So one half of nature's waste team are the breakdown team. The other half are the scavengers. Let's meet some of them. Same thing, I'm going to give you 1 minute as a class to see how many of these creatures you recognize. Off you go. Okay, so some of these are probably much more familiar to you. We've got the hyena, the cockroach, the raccoon, the jackal, the vulture, the seagull, the fly, and many, many other animals, birds, and creatures that live in the natural world, who we can call the scavengers. They will go and clean up the mess of any organic waste that can't be decomposed and use it to create nutrients to keep their own bodies healthy and alive. And then they will pass it through their bodies in the form of defecation and urination to put those nutrients back in the soil. So nature's got a pretty good system of waste removal. The cleanup crew are decomposers, as we said. They decompose or they break down all of the leaf litter, all of the fallen logs, things that have come off the natural world and fallen to the ground. And they turn those back into nutrients for the soil, which help fertilize the soil and help other plants to grow. Every team member has its own role and its own job in the process. Some help to break down the plants, such as the leaves, the dead plants, the branches or the logs, and they're the breakdown team. And others are the meat eaters or the scavengers who take the dead animals, dead birds, dead creatures, and turn them into nutrients and then back into the soil to create healthy soils. Now, most of this crew like to work when it's dark, and dark and moist are the perfect conditions for decomposition to take place, which is why you probably have never seen much of this happening. So what about humans? What happens to all of the rubbish that humans make? Now, as we've seen, there is no such thing as waste in nature because nature has got a really efficient system of getting rid of and reusing and recycling all of the waste. And you might be saying, well, Rachel, we can recycle, we can reuse our waste. And yes, we're starting to learn that there's a lot of things that we can recycle and reuse. And many of us in our kitchens will have got brown bins for organic waste. We'll be putting our food compost into those brown bins, and they will be taken away and turned into compost to put back into the soil, and all those nutrients will go back into the soil. So things like leftover food and scraps from when we're doing our cooking, they will all go into our compost bins, as will things in the garden if we're doing some gardening. However, we also in our kitchen have another bin known normally as the black bin, and it's this bin that is the big problem, because all of the rubbish that we throw into our regular bin goes here to landfill. Now, we send thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of rubbish to landfill every day. And what happens to it? It just sits there. Now, you might say, well, does it not just decompose or disappear like the waste does in the natural world? Well, some of it, if it's food waste, it will, but the majority of it will sit there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now, we're going to do a quick quiz. I'm going to show you 6 items of rubbish. And for each of those items, I would like you to have a guess, or maybe you know, how long it would take for that piece of rubbish to completely disappear if it was put out onto the ground. So we're either working in small groups, or you might want to do it as a class. I would like you to write down number 1 to number 6 on a piece of paper, and then I'm going to show you each of these pieces of rubbish. Okay? Are we ready?
Okay, so the first is an apple. How long do you think an apple would take to disappear? Write your answer down next to number 1. The second is a piece of cardboard. Now, how long might a piece of cardboard take to disappear? Write your answer down next to number 2. Number 3 is a tin can. How long would a tin can take to disappear? Write your answer down next to number 3. Number 4 is a plastic bag. How long would a plastic bag take to disappear? Write your answer down next to number 4. Number 5 is a glass bottle. How long would a glass bottle take to disappear? Write your answer down next to number 5. Number 6 is a piece of foil, a piece of tin foil. How long would it take a piece of tin foil to disappear? Write your answer down next to number 6. Okay, I'll just show you those once more. Number 1, an apple. Number 2, some cardboard. Number 3, a tin can. Number 4, a plastic bag. Number 5, a glass bottle. And number 6, some tin foil. Okay, now swap your answers with a team next to you if you've done it in pairs or if you've done it as a class. You can hold fire for a second and wait for the answers, and make sure you've got somebody else's answers to look at. Now, some of those you might know already, some of them you might have had a guess for, but let's find out the actual answer. Now, an apple, hopefully you recognise that this is actually organic waste. It's a food waste, and we shouldn't really be throwing away an apple. We should be eating it instead. But if this apple did fall onto the ground, maybe it fell off a tree, it would take about 2 months to completely disappear. And we saw a picture earlier of how an apple slowly rots and disappears back into the ground. So an apple, 2 months. Now, cardboard is mainly made from tree pulp, and so it's an organic matter normally with a little bit of processing. So it won't disappear very quickly, but it won't take too long, about 3 to 4 months normally for some cardboard. Number 3, tin can. Now, this does not look like anything natural, and as such, it's going to take an awfully long time to disappear. A tin can on average would take between 100 and 200 years to completely disappear. A plastic bag. Now, we all know that single-use plastic bags are one of the worst things that we can have in our natural world for causing litter, because they do not disappear for a very long time. On average, a plastic bag will take about 1,000 years to disappear. So imagine if I threw this away now on the floor, it would still be here 999 years later. A glass bottle. Again, if we just threw this away and left it on the ground, this would take around 1 million years to decompose and disappear. 1 million years, this glass bottle. And finally, our tin foil. As far as we know, and from all the research that's happened, this will never, ever disappear. So some of these items are incredibly harmful, because when they're sitting on landfill, they're not just sitting there doing nothing. They're starting to leak or ooze out what can be very harmful toxic chemicals. So the chemicals that are used to make, for example, the tin can or the tin foil or the plastic bottle, these chemicals will start to be released as these items start to decompose or to disappear. And these chemicals will go into the soil, maybe go into the airways, maybe go into the waterways and pollute the natural world. So while we might think that landfill isn't necessarily a bad thing because it's just sitting there, the fact is, number 1, that rubbish will sit there for up to millions and millions of years. And number 2, the rubbish that's on those landfills can be very, very harmful and very toxic to the environment around. So what should we do?
So when it comes to rubbish, one of the first things we can do is look to nature for some ideas. So what sort of lessons can we learn from nature when thinking about our rubbish? Well, as we found out earlier, everything in nature is recycled and reused. So this is the most important thought we can have about our own rubbish. Can we reuse it and can we recycle it? More importantly, we can try to not make rubbish in the first place. Now, this might sound a really impossible task. How can you not make rubbish? Well, we're very wasteful as people. We often maybe take too much food or we buy too many things and we throw things away without thinking about the most important question: where is away? Because there is no such place as away. When we put something into that bin, whether it's the brown bin, the blue bin, the black bin, it's going somewhere. And sadly, all too many of us throw things into the bin and don't give it a second thought. So one of the most empowering things that we can do is to try to avoid to put things in the bin. Now, many of us, as we said, will have compost bins, and we know that the food waste that we create when we're cooking can go into compost and go back into the ground. But we can think a little bit more carefully about buying things that have got plastic on them, or buying new things when we maybe could just reuse our own ones, or we could recycle our old things, or we could have a swap shop and swap our clothes for the friends, or we could go to the charity shop and buy clothes that have already been used by other people, so that we're not just buying new things and throwing the old ones away. So reuse, recycle, or really try to go as waste-free as we can. Now, when we're thinking about the way forward, there's lots of small things that we can do, and we're going to give you some more tips later on in some of the Thoughbox lessons if you're interested, so you can find out much more. But to finish, I'd like you to think for a moment, and you're going to do this on your own, about the world that you live in, and thinking in particular about the rubbish, and the rubbish that you make and the rubbish that we as humans make. What sort of world would you like to see in the future? Now take a minute and write down on a piece of paper, I imagine a world where, and write down what sort of world that would be. And then think of a pledge that you're going to take. A pledge is one action that you're going to take. And let's make it a pledge to do with our rubbish. I pledge to. And finally, what would you ask world leaders to do? What would you ask the government to do to help reduce our rubbish? I would like you to, okay, so write those ideas down on a piece of paper.
Now, when there's time, why not share your pledges with the rest of the class and learn from each other some of the ideas that you're all going to carry out to try and be as waste-free as the natural world. Good luck!